Welcome to The Growing Band Director, the podcast that dives into topics applying to all of us band directors. My name is Kyle Smith, and joining me is my friend and colleague, Jeff Smith. Together, we discuss many aspects of a school band program, including how to build your concert, jazz, and marching programs, as well as everything else we do as band directors. More importantly, we'll discuss concepts that help us all improve our own programs every day. Always remember the famous quote by Ray Kroc, "When you're green, you're growing, and when you're ripe, you rot." Let's get started. All right, everybody. Great to see everybody. Thanks for joining us again on the Balanced. Nope, that's not the name. The Growing Band Director. It's been a long week. Jeff, how we doing?
Great. Just froze for a second, but I'm back in, I think.
Oh, we are off to a fantastic start. I'm so tired. It's great to be at the weekend and all this. Guys, we're super pumped to have Trae Blanco here with us, Director of Bands at Murray State, and actually just being announced soon to be Director of Bands at Butler University. I got that right, Trae?
That's correct. Those are both true statements, yes.
Trae and I met each other in Maine when he was Director of Bands at University of Southern Maine for a little while. And Trae, you made a big mark on me because you lived across the street from the high school, basically. And I remember when I had to be sick with my kids, Trae would come in and be my sub, not the official sub, but he would come in and rehearse the band. So when I stayed home, the kids got a better teacher than normal.
I don't know about that.
It's amazing because that never happens anywhere. And you were just like, yep, I'll be there, no problem. And your willingness to just help with anything just made a big impact here in Maine, and that's still being felt. So,
well, thanks for that. I appreciate it. It's there's not really a morning that I don't wake up thinking about, maybe I'll go back and teach high school band. There's something about that age group and that pliability and that, I don't know, just the eagerness that those students in that age group really share. And so getting to guest conduct and do those sorts of things with high school groups, even middle school groups, those things are rejuvenating to me. And so, yeah, maybe it seemed like I was coming in to be your sub, and it might have sounded like something that I wouldn't normally want to, but it was, energizing to my own week. It got me back into the swing of things. Like, oh shoot, what? And that third position, where, trombone slide positions, what are those again? And it really kept me fresh. And in fact, just recently doing an honor band, I was working with a group and I was just singing at the top of my lungs and shouting, of course, singing in numbers of slide positions. And we got to the first break, a band director asked me that. He's like, "You still deal with all that?" I'm like, "Listen, people, once you start rolling up your sleeves, there's not a whole lot else to do. You just got to get in there and fix it." So
yeah, and every time I watched you teach,
keep it fresh.
Every time I watched you teach, it was really obvious that you were really helpful with our 6th grade, 7th grade, 8th grade students and high school students, and the ability to high level groups, but also go down and go to near beginners was really awesome. So that was great. I actually had a question for you, and this is for Jeff as well. This is totally random. Spoon River, the Granger.
Oh.
Yes. So which arrangements are we familiar with, and how hard is it really?
I was just actually going to make a quick Google search of how many there are.
There's a lot. The Bainham one is the one that I've bought and I've considered a couple times. And I just wonder if I'm, about if we have experience as to how hard it comes together.
For me, the hardest thing about doing anything by Granger is having the depth of humans to do it well. I think, playing some of that music is terrific. Like, you have a great trumpet soloist for many of those pieces. You need great clarinets. You need a great solo flute player, and all those things. Every time I hear those pieces, I think people are really focused on those sorts of things. But not often in our orchestration anymore are there 4th clarinet parts. And I feel like every time I rehearse a Granger piece, there's always a 4th clarinet part. And so it's like, okay, well, can I play Spoon River? Do I have that many clarinets to make it work? Do I have the second everything? Oftentimes can be 5 saxophones in Granger, right? Do I have 3 really good altos? Not like a two and a chainsaw, but like three really good altos to like make it work. So for me, I think anytime I select anything out of the Granger catalog, it's always about how good are my seconds and how good are my thirds. And if I can find the stability in that, then yeah, maybe. I'm telling you though, we were just talking before we started recording this, right? I am still Granger terrified because people have very hard feelings about how a lot of that music goes. And at the ripe old age of 36, I smile big when people tell me really how it goes, as opposed to what, I might think at the ripe old age of 36. So I don't know if I'm the best person to answer that. Jeff, what do you think?
Well, I had Jeff Renshaw up in Connecticut when I was teaching in Connecticut, and he
Okay.
wrote all those books about Granger and did all that work with Granger. And you're right. You go into a festival and you play any one of the Grangers, everybody's going to tell you how you should have done it. And then you go back and read and say, well, I did 50% here, I did 50% there. And I got gun shy sometimes when I'd go to certain festivals because I knew who was going to be the adjudicators, and I was afraid that because of my interpretation, they may take it out on the kids. And so I was careful about that. But I agree. And I also like the fourth clarinet deal. That's a big deal because it can't be a weak fourth clarinet section.
No.
Because if it's a weak fourth clarinet section, you've already doomed yourself to failure. And with the altos, I had my top group would play it, but I'd only have two altos, a tenor and a bari. So where would number three come from? I'd have to bring somebody in to do it. It didn't always work. So it made for difficult things. I liked for Spoon River, mine was Bob Sheldon's arrangement of it. And that was the one that I used once. And it went well. Fortunately, Bob wasn't in the area. I would hope he could come over and critique it, but he wasn't around.
Sure. And I was just sort of flipping Kyle through I just searched it on Pepper real quick since we're sitting here at our laptops. I'm not done it before, but it looks like there's like even a Spoon River arrangement for Easy Band, like Mike Story has one. The Bainham one, I think, if I remember correctly, and this is another thing, like what else do you play on the program with Spoon River? Because anytime you program Granger, you need like only three percussionists, right? You need typically like a really involved mallet part, a timpanist, maybe, and then snare and bass drum. And the snare part sometimes covers cymbals. And so what do you do with those other, I don't know, 11, however many percussionists, you may have in your band? I don't know. I think that gets a little bit tricky too. I think my sort of last Granger statement, I guess, would be that I think more people should play it and maybe not be so worried about the perfectionism thing. I think we talked a little bit before this, Kyle, just sort of in our texting and about for today, the conversation with Dick Floyd about the 7 deadly sins of making music. And one of the things he talks about, he talks a lot about sins of omission, things that we don't do. But he always reminds throughout the book, and even anytime he's spoken about this book, about just because it's right doesn't make it correct, right? Basically saying like, just because you play everything on the page doesn't make it correct. And I think that sometimes we're paranoid and in a panic about what that has to be, right? And I think going exactly what Jeff said about the adjudicators, like what if they just tear me apart because I played some standard piece and everyone has a feeling of how that goes? I think a little bit more risk taking, and if you have the right players and it's growing the group to the next thing, then by all means don't shy away from it. But I think, yeah, having all the right horses in the right places to do that is tricky. I did a movable dough one time with a university band during grad school because I thought that's probably one of the easiest Grangers. I'm an idiot, like passing around the same pitch like the whole time in octaves with a group that meets 90 minutes a week of non-majors is the dumbest thing I've ever done. We figured it out and it was fine, like kind of what I was saying. But yeah, I don't know. My impression of Granger gets.
For people who don't know the immovable dough, if from what I know, that was written for an organ that had the middle C that wouldn't stop playing, right? So the entire piece has middle C.
Cipher.
Yeah. I really love the Douglas Wagner Children's March. I don't know if I've mentioned that before, but if anybody wants to check that out, it's a solid grade 3. And if you didn't know any better, you'd actually go moments thinking that it was actually the real Children's March, because it has a lot of the same stuff in it, but it is definitely much easier. Do you guys have other, while we're on the topic of Granger, which was completely unplanned, do we have any other suggestions of maybe some of these other adaptions of Granger that you've seen before or really like? I know I'm putting you guys on
There,
the spot.
there are two things that come to mind, like right off the bat, and I don't remember who did the arrangement. I'm gonna have to look it up in a second. There are three movements of Lincolnshire Posy for grade 3 band. I rehearsed it. I first found out about it actually from in Maine, from Caitlin down at Cape Elizabeth. She invited me out to come work with her band, and they were playing it, and I was
Granger,
like,
I think it's called
"What's that?"
Percy Granger Suite. I think it's called.
Yeah, and I was just blown away. It's adjusted for key. Some of the weird meters, like 3/2, was turned into 3/4, and those sorts of things. So it was more approachable, but the richness of the sound was there, and I thought that was really great. And then there's a piece that I've done about a zillion times over again, by Carol Britton Chambers, called Rusty Bucket and Other Juke Joints. It's like Molly on the Shore, but without triplets. So it's really cool. It's a clarinet workout. It sits a little bit easier, and it features everyone. There's a euphonium solo in it and everything. It's a Granger. It's access to Granger isms through Carol's sort of masterful arranging. So those are two pieces that I do a lot. If I get invited to do a freshman band, especially like a freshman honor band somewhere, I'll do that great 3 pieces from the Granger. And I do the Carol's piece a lot with upper high school bands, but it brings us into that sort of scoring, the sort of transparency, but also importance of second and third playing. I've even messed with seating charts when doing those things, and like moved third clarinet players to the second row, because like kind of like Jeff was saying, you can't have a weak fourth clarinet section in any Granger. So I mean, I almost move them to sit right next to me on the podium so that I can hear, feel, and breathe everything that's going on, like right here with them. I don't know, Jeff, what are your thoughts?
Well, the one that I used was the suite from Lincolnshire Posy, the Vincent arrangement.
Okay.
It was for my middle band, but I wanted them to be exposed to Granger. And I felt that was the best way, because if I pull the other ones out, I didn't have the instrumentation. It was beyond their accessibility. And I cheated. I had a large percussion section, so I rewrote parts for different people playing different mallet parts so that they could at least play and not sit there on their hands. And yeah, it may not have been true to form, but at least a kid could walk out of the program and say, "Hey, I played something by Percy Granger."
I love that. I think more people should do that. I mean, especially in like the Granger world, right? I mean, he wrote this music for, how many arrangements are there of Molly on the Shore, right? There's like a living room music quintet version, there's string orchestra, there's violin and piano, cello and piano, band, all these things. Why not make a percussion orchestra arrangement where you have all of your keyboard players involved, and especially of all the composers to be exposed to? I know a lot of directors that'll do that sometimes and use it as like a tool for rehearsal, and then maybe not do it during performance. Maybe only have like 2 or 3 play instead of 12. And I mean, I think it can go both ways. There's a lot of arguments to be made in both directions, but I think you're absolutely onto something. Of at least the student leaves the band room being exposed to that melody. It's part of our very beginning of American music. At least the least we could do could be to teach some of these crossover English folk songs.
Well, the nice thing also is that if you look at it, I had 3 ensembles, and not every senior is going to make the top ensemble, but that doesn't mean they shouldn't be exposed maybe to lesser arrangement. That's the wrong word. Easier arrangements of the same
accessible,
composers,
yeah.
so that when they go to college, if they choose to play in the university campus band, they can say, "Yeah, I played something by that guy. This is different than what I played, but I played something like that." And I'm sure they're going to get hit with, "Whoa, this is a lot harder than what I played." But they're at least continuing to play with their instrument throughout their collegiate life, and maybe into a community band life after college.
Yeah.
So there's a few. I just typed them down here on our note because I wanted to make sure I remembered them. That I do remember that I have used. The Colonial Song one is awesome. Though, and there's a Horkstyle Grange and Lost Lady Found that are completely separate arrangements as well. You're right. They're just so good. They're amazing. They're not what we would call easy, but they're definitely at that grade 2 level. And there was two other pieces that just threw in that if people haven't heard of these in the grade 2 area that I think are just amazing. Both are by a composer named Gene Milford. I don't know if you guys have heard of Gene Milford. He is like on the same level of Pierre LaPlante to me. The stuff is so good. And Castle Bay and Royal Oak are two pieces that are original pieces, but Castle Bay goes from 4/4 to 6/8 to 4/4, where the beat stays the same. So it's a really good way to use 4/4 and 6/8 together. And Royal Oak sort of has hints of Holst in it, but in a modern contemporary way. That's a grade probably 2.5. So Castle Bay and Royal Oak are ones that I had thought of as well. Do we have any other thoughts on this before we move on? No?
We probably could talk about Granger all day long, but let's put this thing in drive.
Okay. So we're talking about habits of a successful teacher today, but it's really just a bunch of different things, you know, that are things for us to talk about. So the next thing I wanted to just kind of have a discussion about was having high standards. And I think I added that one and we didn't even really talk about that much, but you know, Trae, one thing that I've heard a lot and I've noticed you do whenever you're teaching groups is you always have a specific standard that you think is the highest the kids can achieve. And you won't accept anything less than that, like right from the very beginning. So can you speak a little bit about that approach and how to do it, even if the bands are not amazing, and what kind of culture that might create?
Sure. I think everybody's personality is different. And I tell our conducting students all the time that if you're not you on the podium, right, you're just telling a lie. And so whether that becomes true when you get off the podium and people find out you're a different person in conversation than you are interacting with them, I think that to me is the big thing. So I try to just be me on and off the podium, and it makes my life just a little bit easier. So for me, there are some things that right from the get-go, you know, like just sitting down with a group, even if I'm just sitting in to do an honor band, if I'm invited somewhere, it's not a group I'll see for longer than, you know, a day and a half or whatever. There's some sort of, I call them sort of non-negotiables. And for me, those are that we start and stop together. You know, I can't handle like people playing on for 27 measures. And it's not like I think the days of what I would call the tyrannic years of band directors, right, where you can like fly off the handle and throw something at a kid and then just move on with your life and no problems. I mean, those days are gone, and I think, thank God. But, you know, being really insistent that when my hand goes up, we stop. And so, when my hand goes up, just, you know, okay, everyone stops and it's no big deal. And we start talking and they get instructions. So that to me, starting and stopping together is like sort of a non-negotiable. The other thing for me is the sound in the room. You know, I'll tell them early on, you know, everybody is the first instance that we stop and I hear someone talking, I'll say, give me your eyes, you know, everybody right here. And I'll say, do me a favor, everybody turn to someone next to you and just whisper one sentence. Just whisper it to them on a count of 3. Ready, set, go, and whisper. And I'll say, okay, can you tell how loud the room is? Right. So I said, you might think that you're the only person whispering, but if 10 of you whisper, it starts to create chaos in the room. And, you know, so for me, the silence, you know, I'll ask groups often, how does Dr. Blanco like his bands? You know, and they'll say quiet. And there's a time for fun, and I'll tell jokes as long as I get to know the group and I can sort of gauge how quick we can come back from those things. But my sort of ground rules or non-negotiables are first that, you know, it has to be pretty quiet. And the other thing for me is just the starting and stopping together, because I just don't think there's any reason not to. And then as far as like standard or performance goes, I think that very rarely, I guess, it hasn't happened in a while, picking repertoire that doesn't fit the group. And like when I come out to do, if someone invites me to do an honor band, they'll normally send me like 1 or 2 years of past programs. Well, and I'll normally call and ask like on the phone, like, okay, you don't have to write this down in typed words for the world to see, but I need to know how this program went. Like that's what was in the folder. Did it go well? Because I think that all too often we pick music kind of based on what was on the stand, not what was actually achieved. And that's detrimental for the students. And so I don't want them to have a negative experience. I want them to be positive and happy and engaged and like have a good time. And if I'm going to hold them to this like really high standard of achievement, there's no sense in putting Lincolnshire Posey on the stand when we very well should be playing Pierre LaPlante American River songs, right? I mean, that's not their error. That's a me error. And so I think for me, having really high standards for the students from the beginning comes from picking the right repertoire, those sort of non-negotiables that I talked about. And then from the very beginning, even if we're sight reading, I'll tell the group all the time, what are you saying through your instrument? What are you saying? Right? What you should be talking in sentences. And right now, all I hear you doing is saying one word after another, and that's what you're playing at me, and no one in the room enjoys listening to it, right? If the notes go up, then maybe crescendo a little bit. If they go down, decrescendo a little bit. If you hear a crunch, make it louder, right? If you find out that you hear a crunch because you're playing out of the key, well, then you don't have to play louder. You just have to fix the accidental, right? So these are sorts of things that I just kind of encourage from the beginning because I want them to be a part of it. My teacher, Gary Hill, at Arizona State, when I was there, Gary used to talk about how, there's no reason for the band director in the room to be the only person that can line it up and tune it up, right? It's not our sole responsibility to line everything up and tune everything up and then present a concert, right? And I think the more early on I can get students invested in being a part of that, it sort of helps raise the standard in the room. If I'm working with a group all the time, like my group here, the conversation when things aren't going so well is typically based on if we are all in this together and your colleagues are practicing and they're putting in the time for the rehearsal schedule that I've put out, but some of us aren't, how does that make us good stewards? It doesn't. It makes us like bad stewards of time, and we're wasting our colleagues' time. So I try to make it more about like the group effort. And the wind ensemble, my group here, we talk a lot about, with the wind ensemble, I abbreviate it all the time, we. And that's kind of how we talk about it. We this, we whatever. And that's a big part of language for me, in that like it really is about all of us. We's meeting at blah 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 time. We'll see you then. All these things, and the students have bought into that a lot here, and that's been really important for me. And I'll take that kind of wherever I go. It's something that I knew a little bit about here, language, but using that here has really sort of helped me to develop that buy-in, that overall culture that says, well, we're all in this together and we're all going to work to achieve excellence. And excellence looks different kind of every stage of the way. In the beginning, it's not sight reading Lincolnshire Posey and being perfect. We're not the Marine band. We haven't played it 47 times with our same colleagues, over the course of 20 years. But I think that there's balance in both.
You reminded me of something as you're talking about including, thinking about we. I try to use that word more than I or me. But I've been doing something more recently since COVID. We can rehearse a band till we're blue in the face, but sometimes they've reached their max and you need to make them think that the things they're working on are their idea. So I've started doing this now with my group is if I feel like it's a good day for it, I'll stop and I'll say, okay, you tell me what you want to work on. Raise your hand, give me a measure, give me a spot. And you know what? We all know the stuff they choose is the same junk that you're going to work on anyway, but then you're just like letting them fix it. And sometimes you let them even figure out what's wrong. And that's, kind of like the flipped classroom kind of thing has worked from time to time if you can trust the group.
Mm-hmm. Totally. My teacher at IU, Mr. Pratt, told us this in seminar. And this is kind of like letting a secret out of the bag, I think. But he talked, he's working with some of the best players. Players in the wind ensemble at IU are going on to win orchestra jobs and all over the world, and military band jobs, all sorts of stuff. But one of the things he talks about with his group there is that all praise is personal and all critique is instrument based. So if there are problems, he will say, clarinets, could we go back to 54? We're having some intonation problems. But if it's, Kyle, that was a terrific trumpet solo, thank you, and moves on. And that's something that I try to use a lot because, especially now, coming out of COVID, there's a certain amount of balance that's different in regards to just the atmosphere of rehearsal, just the way that students come to us differently than they did in February of 2020. I mean, it's just a different experience. At least that's my experience with students. And so I think balancing that has been really helpful now coming back to full band, especially with students. Their morale is kind of all over the place, depending on what, level they're at. But it's a really easy way to say, Jeff, thanks for being prepared today. That solo at 46 was great. Saxophones. Our accompaniment section underneath Jeff's solo is not so great. It needs attention. Let's revisit that tomorrow.
But I think you're doing something that's also we got to point out to our listeners is that you're being specific. A lot of times conductors will get in front of the group. Well, that's out of tune. Well, there's
Right.
62 people in that rehearsal, and not all 62 are out of tune, and you have to pick it out. I was with one group, and one conductor was saying it's out of tune. It wasn't out of tune. He needed to specifically state, tubas, you're playing the wrong note. And you've got, and what I hope to do and what I try to do is to be specific about what needs to be fixed. Praise the soloists, praise the accompaniment, but say, okay, but clarinets, we have a problem here. We have an intonation problem in the throat register. We need to fix that. Flutes, we're having an intonation problem with the C sharp, the D, and the high E flat. We need to fix that problem and be specific to the problem so that everybody feels, okay, I'm not being called out because of a generalist statement. I'm being given specific direction on what I need to repair and make it so that the other kids can say, okay, if we don't do something correctly, we're going to be called out on it to how to fix it, what's wrong, how to fix it, and why to fix it. And then when we do it right, we get said, thanks, I really appreciate you for fixing that. That's really nice. That shows a lot of work you did in the practice room.
So you've made a great segue into something again that was not planned at all. But there's a book that I've just read and found, and it's a new college a technique book that a lot of colleges are using with their music ed students and conducting students as well. It's done by Andrew Boyson Jr. and it's just published this year, called "Developing Rehearsal Techniques Through Active Listening." And what Andy chose to do through this was he basically wanted to address the big problem that all beginning teachers have is when they listen to a band. Okay, when you stop, what the heck are you going to work on? What was wrong? Why was it wrong? And how do you fix it? So what he did was he asked a number of bands to record a piece at like the sight reading level, and then record a piece at the almost concert ready, well, about halfway to concert ready time. So there was plenty of things wrong that could be worked on. And then at the same time, and they're all in like 16 measure phrases. So it's not the whole piece, it's like sections of it. And then he also sent those recordings to dozens of great teachers, university professors and conductors, and high school teachers and middle school teachers that he knows from around the country. And he asked them to listen to those and say, would you fill out this Google form with what you would fix if you were in front of this band? So then he compiled all that data and put a book in along with it. And when you buy this, you get all the scores as well. But what the people who do this get to do is they listen to a recording, and then they get to see an answer sheet for what Frank Kelly would say, or what Trae Blanco would say, or what Kyle Smith would say. And they get to see all of the top answers from people who've been doing it for a long time. So they get to go, oh, I didn't notice that. I didn't hear it. Let's go back and try it again. And, I know that was his sabbatical project, and he worked on that a lot. And I think it's going to be really helpful because I don't know of anything else out there that's like that. And it's really just aimed at those newer teachers who get in front of a band and they say, I know it's not very good, but how do I actually make it better?
That's awesome. I had seen that, but I had not read it. There's a book also sort of along the same vein, although less, more specific in general, not specific in repertoire pieces, so to speak. Dave Klemmer and John Pasquale. John's the director of athletic bands at University of Michigan. They published a book called The Directed Listening Model, and it's really changed the way that I rehearse. In that, basically, sounds like Andy's book is focusing on future music teachers as almost like as an academic approach, where like in a methods course, this is how we do it. In my rehearsals now, and I thought I used to do this, but I have a going to grad school and like trying to keep track of some of this stuff, I have a lot of rehearsal tape. And so I went back to watch some of this, and I didn't used to do this as much as I thought I did. But the whole idea of this directed listening model is that through the rehearsal process, you're training the students on what they should be listening for. And like this is a moment where we listen for the trumpets. And I think we all do that to some extent, but I mean he breaks it down in great detail, and sort of that guided by I don't even Mike Pote at Carmel. We just talking about Mike before we start recording, I think, drew this Venn diagram on his board the other day in rehearsal and shared it on Facebook, and I can't get over it. It's become my mantra for life. Maybe it's been a couple months, but it's just these three circles. You're like standard Venn diagram with this like little intersection in the middle, and one of those circles is intonation. The other one is balance, and the other one is tone quality. And that little intersection of space is kind of where ensemble music making happens. And kind of going back to what you said a minute ago, Jeff, the conductor didn't need to say the tuba's, the note was out of tune. They need to say it was the wrong note. I hear a lot of groups playing all the right notes. And this happens, and it was kind of what we're going to talk about a lot, maybe in just a little bit, but I get asked to come in and clinic a group and work with them. And I hear all the right notes on the page, and everything's going fine, but you can't hear any of the things that you're supposed to hear, because unlike choirs, we don't sing from a score, we play from a part. We can't see all this stuff. And so I think sometimes we overestimate how much the students know. So I'll just do that. And I tell groups all the time, sometimes, like how you were saying, when you're at the end of a rehearsal and students are spacing out and there's no time left, I think that a pencil rehearsal is incredibly effective. Like, gang, grab your pencil. All right, we're going to go through every major rehearsal marking in this piece, and I'm going to tell you who to listen for. And I want you to write it in. I want you to grab a pencil and write it in. And just by doing that, which is something that comes out of this direct listening model and idea of playing in balance that Mike is talking about, I mean, it solves virtually every intonation problem that I hear. I mean, just solving the balance problem is like, oh, wow, you are playing in tune. I thought it was really out of tune because the trumpet's too loud, but as it turns out, everything's fine. So I don't know. I like that idea of approaching it like from Andy's book. I'll have to check that out from an academic standpoint, so to speak. But this directed listening model, I think, is also something that I try to apply a lot, and I do it. Students, when I work with a group and as a guest, they think that that's like magic, and I'm just like, no, 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 no. I'm not playing your instrument for you. I'm not telling you right notes. Your director already told you to play the dynamics. How many of you heard the D word? No, not that D word, the dynamic word, right? Raise your hand, right? And they all raise their hand. You've heard your director talk about dynamics. Okay, then why are you playing out of balance? Well, I don't know. Well, let's focus our listening. And so this whole idea of just take out your pencil. And once they do, oh man, we were just working Clifton Williams' symphonic movement, Fiesta, which I hadn't worked in a long time. And it was really, really good with this band. I mean, this band was playing the heck out of it, but there were some moments where like the balance was just a mess. The people playing the accompaniment, 1 and 3, or 1 and 4, 5, 1 and 4, 5. It's marked fortissimo, and they were just hemming it and hawing, and you couldn't hear the clarinets. So we fixed the balance, and then magically it was like, oh, this piece sounds amazing. Like, well, I didn't do anything. I just told you to play the dynamics on the page.
What's funny too is you mentioned that, I think a lot of people have heard about ensemble dynamics versus your dynamics, right? Because they say this 16 bars should be double forte, cut and paste double forte. So as a teacher, if it's all double forte, but the majority of people should not be double forte, we can't assume that, right? So kids, take your pencil, get rid of the double forte, make it a mezzo forte. You have the ability to change dynamics on the page to help the balance within a section. When they say forte, they just mean the music should be forte. It doesn't mean everybody should be forte.
I think Trae brought out a really great point when he was talking about the balance and you're looking at choral music versus looking at the individual parts. I think some band directors need to realize that you need to teach the kids who have the same parts in a certain section, and they don't. Like, it could be third trumpet, second French horn, second alto, second bassoon, and third clarinets have the same part. You need to listen to one another so you can work together. And people don't always hear that. They just hear their part, like you said, and they don't realize their interaction of what they have within a piece. And we need to make the performer aware of who has similar parts, who has to move with the phrase together at the same time, and who has a contrary part that needs to go here, and it takes care of the balance problems and does help the intonation as well.
Yeah.
So Trey, as somebody who has done countless clinics, either formal clinics or conducting honor bands and things like that, and a heads up for people who are listening from Maine, we do have Trey booked, right, for All-State 2023 in May. So he's going to be coming
forward to it.
And have big shoes to fill. We have Alan McMurray coming next week.
I know. Geez, could you set me up any worse?
He's going to do Resonances 1 by Ron Nelson. And oh goodness, what's the Kelly? American
Angels?
Elegy, of course. Nope, American Elegy.
It's like the 25th anniversary of Angels, 30th anniversary of Angels.
Of
an American Elegy. It's like the 20th anniversary, I think.
Yes, yeah,
25th,
and
something like that.
He's doing it especially, and I had kind of requested a little bit if it was possible to include that, because his deep connection with that piece. He had conducted the Columbine band before it, and then had conducted them afterwards, and was part of that whole process. And then the final piece they're going to play is Variations on a Korean Folk Song. So that's what they're doing this year. And anybody in Maine 2023, Trey is going to be there. So I digress though. Clinicians, like when to have them in for your group. You can have them in at the beginning, in the middle, and the end, and all that. And just give us some words of wisdom as somebody who is a clinician.
It's interesting. I get invited a lot to come out at the end. And you all know this, that we build habits with our students every day, in your rehearsals. Like, we're just building habits. And so if you invite me or anyone else out, the week of festival, I am terrified to get too involved in it, because there are a lot of habits there, and I don't want to tinker too much and mess with it, but I want to help you get better. So, the end for me is problematic. Now, if I come in at the end, sometimes people will ask me to come to a concert. Like if you do a state concert band competition or festival, for example, people will ask me to come into that concert that's maybe a week before and make a tape. And I think I can be helpful there, because I'll just kind of do the running dialogue just like you would at a festival. But to be in the classroom the week of makes me a little bit nervous, just because I think that I have no problem rolling up my sleeves and talking, like we were talking earlier about the clarinet throat register. Like, I don't have any problems having at the very beginning being like, we all got to put our right hand down on those 3 notes, because that's a disaster in sharp. And trombones, I saw everyone put your mute in, and no one's, you have a tuning slide in your hand to adjust. You don't have to mess with your tuning slide. Trumpets, I saw all of you put a mute in. No one adjusted. What's that about? I think at the beginning, it's a little bit easier. Let's say a group has read through the piece, done some work on it enough to sort of like, to do a little bit more than stumble through it. I would love to come out then and talk about like, oh, this is a big moment. Or you were talking about forte dynamics a minute ago, right, Kyle? Like,
yeah.
I'm looking at this piece with you by, fill in the blank composer, and there are 6 moments in this 100 measure piece where the whole band is playing fortissimo. Like, we need to take out our pencils and figure that out, because we can't play, 22 measures at fortissimo. And I'm sure this has happened to you, Jeff, sitting in, doing any sort of concert band adjudication or feedback, and a group comes on stage and it is just loud. I mean, just loud. And so I love soft band. I mean, I work like heck to get groups to play soft band. So having the invitation to come out early, I think that's moments to say, oh, this could go like this. What if you rehearse it like this and build habits this way? Or, oh, this piece is from this era. So I hear your group playing a really, really snappy, short, aggressive staccato, but, Morton Gould or Nellie Bell were probably not thinking about that same staccato that your group's been playing on this Salcedo piece. So I might encourage the group early on to sort of think about that. I've been on this kick lately a lot about, and I think I'm sure I stole it from, what is it Pablo Casal's great artists are the best stealers? I forget who says this. Anyways, I don't remember who I stole this from, but this idea of the more mature you want your group to sound, the more variety you have to do in everything. And I think that's articulation, dynamics, right? Range. We know that the more difficult the music is, right? Like grade 6 repertoire, you're supposed to be able to play like 6, super, super C on trumpet in grade 6 whatever it is, like the range continues to expand. So when I'm working with groups talking about that, I'll say, like in this slow piece that we're working on, we need to develop a longer and wider range of dynamics. And I think the earlier you bring someone in to work with your group to try and put those ideas out there for students to try out, and for you to decide as the conductor, as the teacher, if that's what you want to do, it gives you longer time to process them and like develop them, as opposed to thinking about at the end like, oh, I made the world's most beautiful German chocolate cake and I'd love for you to come in and approve of the icing. Well, I don't get to give a rating coming in to give you a clinic the week of, like your state festival, does that. So I think the earlier the better. We did a little experiment with the middle school band this year here, just down the road from me. I saw them 3 times over the course of 2 months in preparation for their large group festival. And it was really interesting to see that process. I was there when we read the 2 of the 3 pieces. And each time I went, we gave new goals and new ideas. And there's no real way to compare with those teachers. There's no subjective way for us to compare apples to apples. Like, did this work better than last year? Because the 2 previous years were COVID, and then before that it's different kids, and so all those sorts of things. But I think what did happen was that there were sort of more cooks in the kitchen. So with the 2 of them, they sort of co-teach, and myself, we could talk about like, well, what about this? And they would say, well, I think the students could do that. Or what about this? Maybe this piece isn't right. Well, we have some problems in our low brass section, and that's a whole nother story. So let's stick with it. We don't want to punt. So I don't know. It's kind of a roundabout way of saying I think the earlier the better. If you can bring people out,
Well, it's funny. We didn't plan this, but just earlier this week we talked to Randall Standards, and he was on and talking about how he did a clinic for a friend. And he was talking to him afterwards. It was a week before the concert or 2 weeks before the concert, talking about their tone, about how the tone of the band was really awful. And there was a lot of notes, but he couldn't listen to any of it because it was all so bad for the tone. And the director said, well, we're going to work on tone next week.
Yeah.
And that if he had gotten there earlier in the process, they might have been able to fix that.
In support of what Trae just said, back in the 70s and 80s, you guys might not have been conducting band then. In the 70s and 80s, we'd have guest conductors regularly come in and work with the bands. And we'd have them come in. We would have taught the piece as far as just the nuts and bolts, so maybe 2 weeks in, have the guest conductor come in and work with the group. Then a month and a half, 2 months later, have the guest conductor come in for a couple hours, work with the group. And then just before the concert, spend 2 days with the guest conductor, working with the group and putting the performance forward that way. And it was amazing because what we learned from the initial rehearsal, we as directors would try to carry through that mindset through the piece. Then they'd come in and the guest conductor would tweak it a little bit more and say, try this, 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 and this. We do it. And this was combining 2 high schools in the same town and just pushing it through. And then we'd have the final concert in late April where the guest conductor would do 3 or 4 pieces, and they would have worked them the whole way. And it created a nice line of thought, and the kids got to really learn what that conductor was about. And in one case, 2 of the students said, I want to go to school where that guy conducts. And they did. They went to school there, and then they went on and played in some orchestras for quite a while.
And I think that...
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think that, the sooner the better and the more frequently, because at the end of the day, when I go in, and I don't remember if we were talking about this before we really started or we were talking about it after we started, because it all seems like deja vu now, but when I come in, I'm not saying anything that the director in front of me has never said to the group. I mean, we all have the same degrees. Like, we have degrees in music education, and we have taught public school band, and we know exactly what that is. And that's one of the things that I love about going back. When people ask me, like, I just love that. But like dynamics, tone, articulation, all those things, those are everyday pursuits. So I think, having someone else just in the room to reaffirm what you've already said just brings that much more strength to the teacher. I mean, I love that. You know, when I finish every time I clinic a group, I always use the last couple minutes to say, okay, all right, gang, instruments in your lap, eyes here. And I'll say, how many of you have heard Mr. Smith talk about dynamics? They all raise their hand. How many of you have heard Mr. Smith talk to the trumpets about, or the saxophones about F sharp in measure 57 in whatever piece, right? Yeah, always the saxophones. And they'll all raise their hand. How many of you heard Mr. Smith tell the percussion that in this one section it's too loud? How many, you know, I'll ask all the things, try and remember some of the things that we fixed, like big picture things. And I'll say, and I told you all those same things today, and magically we fixed them. Magically. So I just say, imagine if those would have gotten fixed with you all and Mr. Smith, and then I came in today. What else could we have worked on today? There would have been a new laundry list, but we could have got to more things. And so you have a teacher in the room who is incredibly competent and leading you through all these things. You just have to understand that what they're saying is actually true. And then the next time I come in, we won't talk about dynamics. Maybe the next time I come in, we'll talk about, you know, artistic decisions to make when a note has an alternate, an altered, a melodic note has, a melody has an altered note. Sorry, I couldn't get that out, right? That's like some high level stuff. Like those are decisions that, you know, Yo-Yo Ma and some of the world's greatest soloists are making those sort of decisions on some of the oldest repertoire that exists. But today we talked about piano versus mezzo piano, you know, and so I think encouraging them to be more invested, which is kind of what got us on this topic, is important. And that's why I want to come in early, because I want to help make sure that they know that the teacher in the room, just by bringing in someone. I mean, how many directors do you all know that bring no one in? And it's like, whether they're afraid of someone to hear the way their group sounds, you know, I don't know. I'll tell you one more quick story that's just comical about this. A good friend of mine, Steve Meyer, who teaches at Northern Arizona University, Michigan grad, IU grad. He is a genius. He has 2 books out with GIA, rehearsing the high school band, rehearsing the middle school band. He's amazing. And he's only like slightly older than me. Not that I'm poking any fun about that, but I mean, he's just really accomplished. Steve had the NAU Wind Symphony played at the CBDNA convention this past spring, I think in Seattle, or CBDNA Northwest. And his group played Dionysiacs by Florence Schmidt, one of the oldest pieces in the repertoire for wind ensemble, and it is harder than sin. He recorded the first read of when he passed that out. And after the performance that they gave at that convention, he posted both recordings, and he said, I want to just share these both with the universe so that no one thinks what we do at the college level is all ivory tower. It is certainly a lot of teaching. And when you listen to that first recording that he made, I mean, the piece itself is like 9 minutes long, and that first recording is like 22 minutes. I mean, it took him a while to get through it. There's some start and stops. There's Steve talking over like, oh, and this is 34 and ready now. You know, like these sorts of things. I just think sometimes we have to pull back the curtain and let everyone know we all have a first rehearsal. We all have beginnings of learning programs with our bands, whether that's grade 1 7th grade band at your middle school, or whether that's grade 5 collegiate wind ensemble. I'm down. Like, just sign me up. I'm here for the beginning.
You know, there's another way to do that that a lot of people don't do, is if you have a friend who's a band director at a neighboring town or sometimes in the same town, if you can maybe schedule a date to share a concert, you know, high school A and high school B share a concert, and then the couple months leading up to it, you each find a way in your schedule to get to the other band and clinic the other band, maybe guest conduct one of the pieces, you know, where they top directors, and just a chance, because, you know, there's a lot of the best people around you to clinic your band are other high school band directors or other middle school band directors who work with that same age. You know, if you're lucky, you're around a college or two, but many of us are not around many college professors, and getting other people who do what you do, you know, is a great thing.
Yep.
Invite people for sure. Absolutely. And do it early, and don't be afraid. We've heard it all. I mean, I told someone recently, it's like a priest in a confessional. You know, I always joke, I'm born and raised in Catholic, and priests always say, you can say anything in the confessional. I'm never going to be surprised. And I think the same is true for bringing in a clinician. I've heard all the things. People invite me in, and then the day before I get like a 6-page text that qualifies everything, like, oh, missing second trumpet tomorrow, first trombone player just got braces off, can barely make a sound, percussion section lost their music today, and the piano player won't be there tomorrow. Like, it's fine, just we're missing some people tomorrow, but we'd still love to have you. All right, cool, I'll be there.
Yeah.
Happens to me too.
It happens to all of us.
Yeah.
It's called life.
Yeah. Those are my thoughts on clinicians.
Well, that's awesome. And I think we're also talking about the deadly sins of music making. There's I don't know how I'm going to let you take the lead on this, Trae.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to steal all Dick Floyd's stuff, because if you haven't read this book, Richard Floyd, the past president, I think his title is actually Emeritus Director of the Texas UIL program, a position that's held at University of Texas at Austin. He was the conductor of the Austin Symphonic Band for like 30 some odd years. One of the like premier community wind bands in the country. They've played at Midwest. They played all over the place. But he has this book, The 7 Deadly Sins of Making Music. And I think if you haven't read it or you don't know about it, get it. He also has a book on artistry and music that's will just challenge you a lot. It challenges sort of your thinking about what it means to make great music. And he talks about these 7 sins as things of omission. And I think for me, it really resonated in a lot of ways I grew up, maybe I'm sure like many people, I mean, I grew up playing sports, and that was a big part of what I did for a long time. And everything about sports to me was about like getting better, getting to the next rung, making the next best team, C team, JV, varsity, right? And then, so these things are all sort of in progression. And I think when we think about, music in that way, it doesn't fit the model. And so what Dick Floyd talks a lot about is the things that we omit in search of perfect, I guess you could say. He doesn't really call it perfect, but
so I'm going to jump in real quick. I actually, I found out that there is a recorded, his clinic on this from Texas is on YouTube. It's about an hour and a half long or whatever. And so you can actually sit and watch it too. And there's something I wrote down, before he was talking about the personality of each note. He was talking about articulation. And his quote was, "The clarity of articulation creates precision, but precision is not the end goal." So the clarity of articulation creates precision, but it's not about precision. That's just a way to get to the end goal. And he says staccato for John Mackey is different for staccato for Mozart.
Yep, which is what we were talking about just a little while ago, right? And that's my whole idea of the line it up and tune it up, right? In pursuit of doing everything that's right on the page, in the vortex that is teaching high school or middle school band, right? I mean, between the bells is one thing, but everything after the bell, I mean, Kyle's kind of smiling. You're going like, yeah, your building's on fire during lunch because everyone needs help. Your kids are having, they need you to be their counselor. They want to know what to do for college. They're having trouble with their boyfriend or girlfriend. You're dealing with a lot of other stuff. But in the midst of the vortex of achieving what's exactly on the page, it's easy to get lost in we are playing all of those notes. We are playing all of those dynamics. Right? We talked about balance, which is a little bit more suggestive. You can't really look at the page and see balance. You have to imagine what that is. But I think getting in search for all of the right things, we leave out some really important things. And he has this example where he takes a piece of music that has no markings on it at all, and then he overlays it with crescendos and decrescendos and dynamics and tenutos and sostenutos and ritardandos and all these things, all to the effect to say that there's no reason to play what's just on the page, and basically to do that is a sin. You're leaving out all these other wonderful opportunities. And I think I was thinking about this a lot recently, since we sort of started texting about this. And there's a lot of discussion around music making in the time of, even in the time of Mozart, even as late as the early 20th century, that people that were making music, there were a lot of really amazing amateur music makers, people that were teaching in piano lessons or playing a violin who also had a daytime job would come home and make really pretty high level music and sort of living room music, chamber music with friends and those sorts of things. And that was a popular activity. And people were making musical decisions the same way they would make inflection decisions in their speech. And then we reach sort of like the industrial age where everything is like stamped 90-degree angles, perfection, and a robot and a machine can do it. And then we sort of started making music in a different way. It becomes even robotic, and then that translates into some of our ensemble music making too. It can be very robotic. And so to achieve everything that's on the page is one thing, but what are you trying to say? What is the group trying to say? And so, I mark music a lot. In fact, there are several pieces that I've done a bunch of times that I have my own set of parts that I prefer to use, which I totally stole from the orchestra world. Because those of you, with orchestra colleagues, those people have bowings. They've got all sorts of markings in their parts, and that is their articulation. It shows when to start and when to stop. It shows where breaks will be. If their tempo is really fast and you have like 6 down bows in a row, you know that those notes are going to need some space and it's going to slow down just a little bit, right? There's no way for a kid's arm to go, like in rapid succession. And so I think I've made some of those markings and parts to try and achieve more than it's on the page. A piece that comes to mind is the Kelly Four Shaker songs. It's a piece I love. I think it's way harder than it looks because it has too many it has so many solos, not too many solos. And it's very transparent. And I always think it's going to be easier to do than it's going to be. Every single time. And then every single time I do it, I cry after the first rehearsal because the first and fourth movement are so hard to put together. So I just made my own.
And I'm going to just jump in. Don't stop your train of thought. But if anybody wants to do the third movement of that, here, take this lovely flower. If you're looking for a slow, like a ballad that's in 6/8, I think it's an E flat major. It's gorgeous. And it's a standalone piece. I forget the name of the standalone piece.
Yeah, you can buy it by itself. So I've just marked those parts. And what that's done for me is I've indicated when I'm going to retardando. I've indicated when I'm going to be in 2/4 and 4/4 on every single part. I've added crescendos and decrescendos where I think they make sense. And now when I do that set, I don't have to worry about having to, I think it goes this way. Could we try it this way? Those things are there. And it gives the students some opportunities to be a little bit more expressive. Say, hey, could you really maximize those crescendos and decrescendos? And then they hear it and go, oh, wow. And they're doing that through some of the greatest American folk music that we have. So what better way to teach them about being expressive with the voice than what, just 150 years ago, anyone's, ancestor or forefather was probably singing this music with wonderful expression, but now we're in a box and we have a printed piece of music that says only forte there, only piano there, crescendo there. And I think it's just because notation it's limited. There's only so much you can write on the page before it's too much. And so I think for me, that's kind of where this intersection happens. Jeff, you look like you're going to jump in with something.
I was just going to say, that's the same way with tempo markings. You get these published pieces and it'll say 160. Well, that doesn't sound good at 160. It's just hurried. But at 140 or 86 versus 74, it allows the music to flow and emote.
And we tell my conducting students all the time that if I hear your band play a piece at the tempo marking the whole time, I'm going to fall out of my chair and die. Because if it is marked 160, I guarantee if I do a piece that's 160, it may start 160, but whenever there's a theme that allows itself some moment of repose, just a little lyricism, and I can lean back into the 152, 148 realm to give the listener a break from that anxiety, I'm going to do it.
Sure.
There was a couple other. No, go ahead, Jeff.
I think the world of marching band has sort of caused us this problems where a band director will take their Dr. Beat and their Long Ranger and put it in the back of the band, hit 160 and go. Oh no, you're dragging. And we need to, there are times where that's necessary, but it's not the solution to a problem. It's creating the problem.
You said it, not me. Yes. Yeah, exactly. And that's if we build rigidity and repetition with our students for only certain things, not for expression and musical line, then it's no wonder that's what they do well. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's just that that's all that they then can do. And so for me, I think you're spot on, Jeff.
How about the age-old comment? You get into rehearsal and you're doing a piece and you're going X speed. And then next day, you're either going slower or faster. And the kids say, well, that's not the speed we went yesterday. And my comment always is, well, that's not how I felt it yesterday. That's how I feel it today. And tomorrow I might feel it this way. And I said, that's our job as we interpret it and how we feel in the moment of the day. Now, if it's a stark contrast, that's a whole different story. But I think we get too caught up, especially in teaching kids getting ready for an all-state or a all-state audition. Something. This is the speed you got to go. Not necessarily, because that's not going to be musical with you playing it. So why don't we try it a little slower and see if we can get it more musical and bring out the interpretation of the piece better?
Yep, absolutely.
There was a couple other points of that book that I wrote down, and I thought I would just share with people. So Dick Floyd has this way of working on short notes with bands where he has a percussionist in the back. He takes 4 different kinds of approaches to this. He'll take a marimba with soft mallets and ask them to play quarter notes. And then same marimba, same note, but now with medium mallets, right? So the note gets a little bit shorter. And then ask the xylophone player with rubber mallets to play it, and then with hard plastic mallets, and just the 4 completely different approaches to that one articulation. And I think most teachers, we do that in some way. We talk about different variations of short, but I had never heard of it in such a concrete way. And that was that was one of those things I heard, and I said, oh, I can do that tomorrow. And that was really cool.
Yeah, and that's going back to what we talked about earlier, Kyle. The more variety your group plays in any particular thing, dynamic, articulation, all those things, for me, the more varieties you have, the more you're showcasing their development, their maturity. And if your group plays a 4-minute piece with 4 different types of staccato, I say purposeful different types of staccato, not just on accident, right? But like define different. I mean, I'd be blown away. I'd fall out of my chair as an adjudicator, because that's some serious attention to detail. That's beyond the page. And I think that's really what we're trying to get at, right? I mean, how do you bring your group beyond the page? Because that's probably why we're all in this today, right? I mean, you've had musical experiences that came off the page. You didn't come because you once played every note on the page of Leonard Bernstein's Slava as a E-flat clarinet player. You mastered all those notes in the stratosphere, and that's why you're in music today. Well, maybe that piece spoke to you. Maybe you had a musical experience with it, but I don't think it's because of the technique in E-flat Dorian or whatever crazy key that piece is in.
Speaking of Slava, there is a great arrangement of that by Robert Longfield, which is a grade 4. It's a little slower, but a lot of stuff is still there. Trae, have you done that arrangement?
I've not done it.
It's quite good.
I've heard too many people do the other arrangement, but so I will begin to suggest the Longfield.
We're doing it right now, and it's approachable. It has the style of the music, and all the stuff is still there, but it's not crazy.
Cool.
And I remember when you were in Maine, you seemed to be a makeup artist, because you always talked about stage makeup. And you talked about how you did. You don't remember that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Refresh my memory.
Well, you always talked about how when somebody is an actor on a stage, their stage makeup, if you see them backstage, is offensive. It's just so gross, right? But it's not meant for up close. It's meant for far away. So you can use that on dynamics. You can use it on articulation. Sometimes you have to exaggerate things for it to speak out in the hall, or if you're on a marching band field, for it to speak up in the box. So Dick Floyd's comment about dynamics was, if an audience doesn't hear it, it doesn't exist, right? So sometimes having to exaggerate things like you would your makeup from far away, exaggerate musical elements so that the audience can hear it appropriately.
Yeah. Oh, I I 100% remember what you're talking about. I thought we were talking about like I was wearing stage makeup, and I was like, I don't remember.
I don't
wearing
remember
stage
that
makeup,
part.
but now I know what we're talking about. Totally agree. It's an excellent example.
Yeah.
And your students should feel the same way in concert band too. Piano dynamics, which we were talking about earlier, ensemble dynamics versus individual dynamics are different things, right? I ask our students in the wind ensemble here all the time, how would you play this if you were standing up on stage? Right? Because I hate band sound. Like when people play sounds in band that are just like mediocre, just like, I hate that. And nothing sets me off more because all of them are playing solo rep at the collegiate level, right? I mean, and even some of our high school students are taking private lessons. How would you play if you were standing up on stage with a pianist? What would you be saying to the audience? Sometimes I'll ask them to do it in rehearsal. Horns, could you stand up and play this? Let's play 57. And it's a totally different sound. And I'll say, well, why? Why is it okay the other way? Like, why would you let that be okay? And so I think the more we can encourage our students to be part of the journey, part of the achievers in why are we trying to do music? What are we trying to get off the page that's not there? I think if we can encourage them early on to be a part of that, then it makes our job a little bit easier the further along we go.
One of the discussions I used to have with my kids, because we went to a lot of different festivals, is that I'd get them early to sit in the back and listen to another group play. And then before we'd go out, I'd say, how are the acoustics in this auditorium different from the acoustics in our band room and our stage and our black box? And then they tell me, say, well, what are you going to do with your notes to accommodate what's going on in that auditorium? And we talk about the proscenium arch, where people forward of the proscenium arch, sound's going to travel different than the people who are on the arch versus people who are in the back versus people who are blocked off. And to get them to be part of the conversation that things have to change based on the format in which you're performing at that time.
I was thinking about that earlier, Jeff, and I was going to ask you, how many times have you prepared a group, thought it was all great, everything sounded great in your band room or even your own concert hall, and then you went somewhere else and everything seemed out of balance?
Oh, every week.
Yeah, it's the worst.
Our band room, we could get it sounding marvelously, but I knew when I went on my stage at school, it was like playing into a pillow. But then when I'd go to one of the local universities, it would be awesome. So we would talk about that within the confines of rehearsal and talk about length of notes and how different lines are not going to come through as well and what we needed to do with it to make it come through.
Yeah, so I think that's a big
they had
conversation.
ownership to what was going on then.
Bingo. You didn't have to be the only person that lined it up and tuned it up. I think that's great.
That takes foresight from the director, knowing where you're going to be playing. And if obviously the more experienced you are, having the ability to think about if that's going to translate or not. My band room is obviously opposite, Jeff. My band room is super dead because there's carpet everywhere and on the walls and all that. But we go onto the stage and it's super resonant. So just having that foresight and knowing where it's going to be for performance.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Trae, we've gone a long time here, but I think it's been a great conversation. Is there anything else that you would like to tell the world or talk about?
Oh my gosh, tell the world. That sounds like I could pontificate, but I don't really. I'm not the pontiff. No, I mean I think we've had some pretty good conversations about achieving musical. I don't want to say musical excellence because that feels like it's being quantified, but high level music. We've been talking a lot about high level music making by involving our students more in the process, and then also by having standards that require more than just what's on the page. And I think sometimes that's a challenge because for students, especially now, like in rebounding from the pandemic, it's like, I'm just barely getting by. What can I do to just barely get by? But I think if we can get them to the point where they begin to feel something, we have, which is, again, I said this earlier, it's probably the reason why we're all here. We had a music making experience at some point that you felt something and you didn't feel the piano dynamic in measure 54. You felt some overarching musical phrase or something that really spoke to you in a meaningful way. And I think if we can get students to do that sooner, then it becomes sort of ball in our court. We can get them to invest further in the next piece, right? And so finding a way to connect with students, I think, with that regards is really important. And for me, that's something that we're sort of constantly trying to chase. I look at program notes a lot and try and let students know what the piece is about, but I also don't really like force upon them the way I think it is, right? If I've developed a storyboard, if I've developed an idea of how the piece progresses, I'm not going to force that upon them because maybe they have another one, but I'm going to do everything I can to prompt them and ask them. And I think we talked a lot about that today, prompting about articulation, about balance, about, what Jeff was just saying, prompting the group about, okay, you hear another group playing in this space. How does that affect us? What can we do differently? And I think if you're questioning your students like that frequently, and whether that's frequently daily or frequently weekly or whatever that is to each director out there listening, that starts to improve your students' feelings about how they're part of that activity more so than how they might contribute to their English class, where their contribution is a written exam that they submit, but now they're like in a partnership with you. And I think that really builds up what the directors do on a day-to-day basis. And when I'm in there doing a clinic, sharing that sort of information and wisdom with people that they've asked me to come in and pretend like I have, it's all about that. It's all about how do you build up the students so that they're willing to take risks and you make space for them to take risks. And then you praise those risks, those rewards personally. And if there's critiques, that you make those not personal, you make those about the instrument. And I think if people get anything out of that, I hope that helps you sort of balance and build even further musical relationships with your students, because I'm sure on a personal level, they just absolutely adore you because you're the band director and you mean the world to them.
Very well said. Jeff, any last words?
Trae said it all.
I appreciate that, Jeff.
So if anybody wants to connect with Trae, his website is traeblanco.com, TraeBlanco, traeblanco.com. And congrats on
my Gmail. My Gmail is the same too. If anyone has to send me any hate mail, it's the same name at gmail.com.
And for anybody who's listening who has ideas for other episodes or things they'd like to hear us talk about or dive into, please connect with us online as well. And we would love to hear from you. Everybody, till next time, take it easy. Thank you for listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends to subscribe too. We're available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, our YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, if you have the time, we highly recommend the After Sectionals podcast for more great listening. Thank you for listening to the Growing Band Director. See you next week. Thank you for listening to the Growing Band Director podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe. And if you want to help spread the word, please give us a 5-star review and tell your band director friends